The issue of a woman serving in the pastor is an issue of fundamental biblical authority.
A 73-year-old woman named Dorothy sits in a half-empty church in rural Mississippi. She's been coming here every Sunday for 61 years. The pews used to hold 300 people. Today, she counts 47. Most of them are over 60. Her children stopped coming years ago. Her grandchildren have never been. The pastor quit last month and moved to Texas. Nobody has applied to replace him. Dorothy thinks her town is just going through a rough patch. But the town's only hospital closed in 2018. The pharmacy shut down last year. And half the graduating class left the state the day they turned 18. Dorothy's church isn't dying. It's already dead. She just hasn't been told yet. And what's happening in her town isn't an accident. It isn't bad luck. It's the collapse of an entire system, one that held the American South together for over a century. The churches, the politics, the social networks, the economics, all of it was connected, and all of it is falling apart at the same time. This isn't just a story about religion. This is a story about what happens when the foundation of an entire region cracks, and no one has a plan for what comes next. To understand how this system broke, you need to understand how it was built. Go back to 1976. Jimmy Carter, a born-again Southern Baptist from Georgia, wins the presidency. White evangelical Christians helped put him there, and at that point, most of them didn't care much about abortion. The Southern Baptist Convention had actually passed resolutions supporting limited abortion rights. Twice, in 1971 and 1974. Abortion wasn't their issue. Something else was. After the Civil Rights Act passed, the IRS started going after Christian schools that refused to integrate, threatened to pull their tax-exempt status. Religious conservative leaders were furious. Racial segregation was their original rallying cry. But they had a problem. You can't build a national movement on defending segregation. Not publicly, not anymore. So political operatives went looking for a different issue, something that would mobilize millions of religious voters without the toxic baggage. They found abortion. By 1979, Jerry Falwell had launched the Moral Majority. The playbook was simple. Merge evangelical Christianity with right-wing politics. Turn churches into voting machines. Make faith and party loyalty the same thing. And it worked. For decades, it worked brilliantly. The South became the Republican stronghold. The Bible Belt became a political fortress. And the church became the center of everything. Not just worship, but business deals, job networks, social services, political organizing, community identity. If you weren't part of a church in the South, you were an outsider. But here's what nobody said out loud. The system wasn't really about faith anymore. It was about power. And power systems have a weakness that faith systems don't. They need results. They need growth. They need people to keep showing up. What happens when they stop? The numbers tell that story. And the numbers are brutal. In 2006, nearly 1 in 4 Americans called themselves white evangelical Protestant. Today, it's barely 1 in 7. When the Southern Baptist Convention, the biggest Protestant denomination in the country and the backbone of Southern religious life, has lost over 3 million members since 2006. 16 straight years of decline. But membership is just part of it. Baptisms, the single most important measure of new believers, hit their lowest point since 1919. That was when America had 104 million people. Today, it has 335 million. The pipeline of future members isn't shrinking. It's nearly gone. And in the South, where these churches mattered most, the collapse is even steeper. 2 out of 3 adults under 30 in southern states say they rarely or never attend church. That's not a slow fade. That's a generation walking away. But why? What changed? Also, a retired Baptist pastor in rural Tennessee, we'll call him Reverend Mike, spent 31 years behind the same pulpit. He said something that sticks with you. I buried more people than I baptized this year, and the ones I buried, their children didn't come to the funeral. Their grandchildren didn't come either. They'd already left. Nashville, Atlanta, out of the South completely. And the few young people I do see, they look at me like I'm defending something indefensible. Something indefensible. That word matters. Because the young people didn't just leave because they got bored. They left because the internet showed them a different world. Kids in small southern towns could suddenly see that other states had lower teen pregnancy rates because they taught real sex education instead of abstinence only. But they could see that their LGBTQ friends weren't broken or sinful. They could see maternal mortality rates in their own states that looked like developing nations. And then they watched their pastors, the same ones who preached about moral character, line up behind politicians who embodied the opposite of everything they were taught. The gap between what the church said and what the church did became impossible to ignore. So they left. But here's where it turns into something bigger than a church problem. In towns like Dorothy's across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, the church wasn't just where you prayed. It was where you found a job, where you made business connections, where your kids played sports, where you got help when times were hard. The church was the entire social system. When the church shrinks, now that system collapses, and nothing replaces it. Drive through rural Alabama right now. Church buildings with "for sale" signs. Congregations that once filled 300 seats, now struggling to fill 50. Pastor positions sitting empty for months because nobody wants the job. And it gets worse. In 2022, the Southern Baptist Convention faced something it couldn't pray away. An independent investigation uncovered a secret list. More than 700 pastors and church workers accused of sexual abuse. Convention leaders knew about it. They kept the list hidden. They did nothing to warn churches. They did nothing to protect victims. Some leaders attacked the survivors who came forward, called them liars, said they were trying to destroy the church. The institution that told America it was the guardian of family values had been protecting predators. For decades. Young people saw this. They saw leaders they were taught to trust covering up crimes against children. And they made a simple, rational decision. This system is corrupt, and they're not coming back. Now layer on what happened after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022. 13 states passed near-total abortion bans, 11 of them in the South. The faith system celebrated 50 years of activism. Victory. Then reality arrived. In Texas, maternal mortality jumped 56% in 3 years. Women with life-threatening pregnancies were turned away from emergency rooms because doctors feared going to prison. One woman nearly died from sepsis after doctors refused to end a pregnancy that had zero chance of survival. Doctors started leaving. OBGYNs, who had practiced for decades, packed up and moved to states where they could do their jobs without a lawyer in the room. Entire counties in Alabama and Mississippi now have 0 OBGYNs. 0. Women drive hours for basic prenatal care. If something goes wrong on that drive, they might not make it. The faith system's response? Silence, denial, or crisis pregnancy centers that investigations found had no medical staff, gave out wrong medical information, and offered nothing but pamphlets and pressure. And the states kept saying churches and charities would handle health care. But those churches are broke and shrinking. Over 130 rural hospitals in the South have closed since 2010, more than any other region. The safety net doesn't exist anymore, but the political system still pretends it does. The young people see all of this. Is women dying, doctors fleeing, friends terrified, churches celebrating laws that are killing people, so they don't just leave the church. they leave the South entirely. And that's when the economics start to break. For years, Southern states had a simple pitch to businesses. Move here. Taxes are low. Labor is cheap. People share your values. It worked for factories and warehouses, but the modern economy doesn't run on cheap labor. It runs on educated workers. And educated workers have choices. They're choosing to leave. Between 2010 and 2023, Louisiana lost 88,000 residents. Mississippi lost 37,000. West Virginia lost 43,000. And these weren't just any residents. They were young, educated, exactly the people a state needs to survive. Companies noticed. In 2023, multiple firms quietly canceled expansion plans in Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. The reason nobody talks about publicly? They couldn't convince workers to move there. Recruiters will tell you off the record, it's a massive problem. People don't want to live in states where their rights are restricted, where the nearest hospital is an hour away, and where the schools are getting worse every year. Tax revenue follows people. When educated high earners leave, budgets shrink, services get cut, schools decline, roads crumble, and that makes even more people leave. It's a death spiral, and instead of changing course, these states double down, pass more restrictions, cut more services, insist the problem is they're not conservative enough. It's like a restaurant losing customers and deciding the fix is making the food worse. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because this collapse isn't just economic, it's political, and it's rewriting the map. For 40 years, white evangelicals were the most reliable Republican voters in America. They showed up at 75 to 80% rates. They voted Republican by margins of 70 to 85%. Politicians didn't just court them. Politicians obeyed them. That power is cracking. In the 2022 midterms, voters under 30 went Democratic by 28 points nationally. But in southern states with abortion bans, that margin jumped past 35 points. Young voters aren't just leaning left. In the South, they're sprinting. Kentucky, deep red state, 2023. Democrat Andy Beshear wins re-election for governor. His strategy? He focused on one thing, the Republican abortion ban that had no exceptions, not even for rape. He won by 5 points. Virginia, Divi Tukstoshi Divdesmit Treshais. While Republicans tried running on what they called a reasonable 15-week abortion limit, voters rejected it. Democrats took full control of the state legislature. Georgia flipped blue in 2020, stayed blue in the 2022 Senate race. North Carolina is now a genuine swing state. Texas is trending purple, not because these states are becoming liberal, but because the extremism is pushing moderates away and energizing everyone else. The Dobbs decision was supposed to be the faith system's greatest victory. 50 years of work, the prize they'd been promised. Instead, it might be the thing that destroys their political power for good. Turns out, when you tell women they have fewer rights than their mothers had, they don't just get sad, they get angry, and they vote. And their husbands vote, their brothers vote, their fathers vote. And the voting bloc that controlled American politics for 4 decades is shrinking every single election cycle. And the leaders at the top know it. So why don't they change course? Because they can't. The leadership is trapped, and most of them trapped themselves. Start with the pastors. The ones who stay face an impossible choice. Their older members, the ones who still show up, still tithe, still keep the lights on, demand hardline positions, no compromise on abortion, no acceptance of LGBTQ people, no backing down from the culture war. But those exact positions are the reason younger people won't walk through the door. Some pastors try to moderate, focus on service, focus on community, talk less about politics and more about the actual teachings of Jesus. It doesn't work. Their congregations rebel. Denominational leaders push back. Yet one prominent evangelical ethicist was essentially exiled from evangelical circles for supporting the LGBTQ rights. He's far from the only one. The system punishes anyone who tries to fix it. But the pastors aren't even the real problem. The real problem is the money. Because somewhere along the way, the Southern faith system became one of the most profitable industries in America. And the people at the top have no intention of letting it change. Megachurch pastors living in $10 million mansions. Televangelists pulling in hundreds of millions in donations. Political organizations like the Family Research Council and Alliance Defending Freedom sitting on combined budgets in the hundreds of millions. Consultants and operatives making fortunes selling fear and outrage to people in the pews. These leaders built personal empires on extremism. Moderation isn't just uncomfortable for them, it's financially catastrophic. A prosperity gospel preacher isn't going to start talking about what Jesus actually said about the poor. Not when he's selling books about how God wants you to be rich. A megachurch pastor isn't going to admit the church might have been wrong about gay people. Not when he's flying private. The grifters captured the system, and they will ride it straight into the ground before they give up their position. Meanwhile, the grief is real. People like Dorothy, people who gave their whole lives to these churches, are watching everything they built disappear. Their communities are hollowing out. Their families are scattered. Their faith feels like it's under attack. And the leaders they trust are weaponizing that grief, telling them they're being persecuted, telling them the world is against them, telling them to fight harder, give more, hold the line. It's not persecution, it's consequences. But telling people the difference doesn't sell books or fill collection plates. So the cycle continues. The leaders profit from the decline. The members suffer through it, and the system keeps breaking. Which raises the question nobody in the South wants to answer. What happens when a system this big actually fails? Not slowly, not eventually. What's already happening right now? There are 3 roads ahead. None of them are comfortable. The first road is the iron fist. Double down. Use to force compliance. Ban books. Control what teachers can say. Restrict voting access. Criminalize dissent. I punish businesses that step out of line. Florida is already walking this road, weaponizing government to fight culture wars, retaliating against companies that disagree publicly, creating an atmosphere where people are afraid to speak. This approach might hold power in the short term, but it speeds up the exodus. Every professional who can leave, does leave. Every company that can expand somewhere else, does. The grip gets tighter. The state gets emptier, and the eventual collapse gets worse. The second road is fragmentation. The South splits apart from within, not along state lines, along city limits. Atlanta looks nothing like rural Georgia. Austin looks nothing like East Texas. Charlotte looks nothing like the rest of North Carolina. These cities are booming with transplants who brought different values and different expectations. The urban South liberalizes. The rural South entrenches. The gap between them becomes so wide that the same state can barely function as one place. 2 populations living under the same governor who can only make one of them happy. This is already happening. It's just going to get more extreme. The third road is the hardest. Reform from within. Some younger evangelicals are trying to take it. They want to strip away the politics, reject the grift, get back to service and community, and the parts of their faith that actually meant something. They want to build churches that welcome instead of exclude, that serve instead of judge, that follow what Jesus actually taught instead of what political operatives told them Jesus meant. These reformers exist. They're real. They're sincere, but they face opposition from every direction. Denominational leaders see them as traitors. Older congregants see them as sellouts. The political machine sees them as a threat, and many of them eventually give up and leave, becoming another number in the decline they were trying to reverse. 3 roads. One leads to authoritarianism. One leads to a region divided against itself. One leads to something genuinely new, but faces almost impossible odds. And while the leaders debate which road to take, the people on the ground aren't waiting. Back in Mississippi, Dorothy is still sitting in that half-empty church. She'll be there next Sunday, too, and the Sunday after that. She told me something at the end of our conversation that she probably didn't mean to say out loud. Sometimes I wonder if we did this to ourselves. She went quiet after that, looked at the empty pews, and then she said something else. My granddaughter called last week. First time in months. She's pregnant. She asked me if the hospital in town was still open. Dorothy had to tell her it closed 6 years ago. Her granddaughter lives in Ohio now. She left Mississippi at 19 and never came back. She has health care. She has a doctor. She'll be fine. But Dorothy keeps thinking about the girls in town who don't have that option. The ones who stayed. The ones who can't leave. She knows the church can't help them. Not really. Not anymore. She just doesn't know what can. Across the South right now, in small towns and sprawling suburbs, in dying churches and packed megachurches, millions of people are asking some version of that same question. And nobody, not the pastors, not the politicians, not the operatives who built this machine, has an answer. The system is failing. Everyone can see it. What no one can see is what comes after.